Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic.
But the final few things I want to do today is just ask you questions that I ask all my guests who come on the Into the Impossible podcast, if you can spare another couple minutes.
Okay.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So the first question involves what's called an ethical will. In Hebrew, it's called a zava'ah. And the notion is that when great minds pass away, they leave not only their material wealth in an actual will, but an ethical will. And what prompted me is when I wrote my book, Losing the Nobel Prize, I noted that Alfred Nobel had no children. He was never married. And he left all his money to this prize. And the prize had a ethical component, that the money in his will would be used to endow a prize that could only be given to those who had the greatest benefit to mankind via their discoveries or inventions in physics, chemistry, medicine, and so forth. And so I want to ask you, when you reach the biblical age of 120, unless you're doing some life extension stuff that I want to hear about some other time, but you hit that biblical age that Moses died at, 120 years old, what do you want to be leaving behind, not only to your biological progeny, but to your ideological progeny in the form of an ethical will?
Well, I think that's a simple question to answer. I have no heirs, I have no children. And when I die, my entire estate will pass into my nonprofit foundation, the Saylor Foundation. And the mission of the Saylor Foundation is make education free for everyone forever. So we're just giving away, our goal would be just to give away infinite education to the world and use all the money to do it for all of eternity. And obviously my ethical will is I believe that education is a good thing, and the world will be a better place if it's a more educated world, and that all of the things that I think ail humanity will require education to overcome. And so an investment in education for humanity is an unmitigated virtue.
Very good. Okay, next we're going to continue to go into the future. I know you're a huge science fiction geek. You mentioned Heinlein. I know you like Asimov and Arthur C. Clarke. But I want to call to your attention the movie 2001, A Space Odyssey. If you've seen that movie, Michael.
A long time ago.
So the opening scene involves these hominids on the plains of Africa, savannah, and they discover this monolith and they don't know what it is, and they hit it with a bone. And then later on in the course of the movie, the monolith kind of appears and it's then appearing on the moon. And so it's meant to be discovered when humanity, it's placed there by some ancient civilization, and it's meant to be kind of a time capsule that would then be only capable of being unlocked, if you will, when humanity has enough of the wisdom that this ancient civilization supposedly would hope for our intention. I want to ask you a question. If you had a monolith and I said it's going to last for 1 billion years, what would you put on it, in it? What would it be about? Kind of like this Voyager golden disk that Carl Sagan launched on the Voyager satellites.
I mean, I suppose you would just put the sum total of the experience of humanity to date as we understand it in the most detailed form you could, and leave that, right? Leave the permanent record of humanity. What else is there to leave of interest other than this is the human race as it lived up until the point when it stopped living. This is the story. I think the interesting thing I've ever read, a nonfiction, is The Story of Civilization by Will and Ariel Durand. And I think just the history of civilization is fascinating and full of virtues. So I would leave the equivalent of that to the extent that I could.
Very good, Michael. Okay, the last question also involves Arthur C. Clarke. So I am the co-director of the Arthur C. Clarke Center for Human Imagination at UC San Diego. And Arthur Clarke had these wonderful kind of pithy aphorisms The first one being what we open every show with, which is his actual voice. You'll hear it when I send you the videotape link. And that is, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. I think I heard you say that on one of your talks in the past. His second law is that for every expert, there's an equal and opposite expert. I like to use that on my colleagues in the faculty club when they get too full of hubris. But his third law, and that's the namesake of this podcast, is the only way of discovering the limits of the possible is to venture a little way past them into the impossible. And that's the name of my podcast, the Into the Impossible podcast. I want to ask you, what mysterious aspect of life might have mystified you as a 20-year-old, 30-year-old Michael Saylor, but now that you've had the courage to venture beyond your limits into the impossible, what advice would you give to that former version of yourself to benefit him for the future?
I think if I was speaking to my 20-something self, I would probably encourage them to study the essence of monetary economics, Austrian economics, and what is money, because I think that most of us don't consider what money is. And I think oftentimes, like I was raised in a family, like there's a Christian trope, money is the root of all evil, right? There's a large segment of our civilization where people say money is the root of all evil, you shouldn't want it. And then the rest of the civilization doesn't know what it is, you know, and they don't think much about it. But actually, monetary economics have determined the rise and fall of empire after empire after empire, and not if you don't fully grasp it, you can work 10 times harder and still fail. And so, no amount of expertise and hard work and discipline and luck will save you from a lack of understanding of monetary economics and the consequences of a exponentially decaying currency. So I would probably hand myself a book on Austrian economics and say, focus upon this and understand the implications. But I'm ashamed to say, I really came late in life to an appreciation of how important this is. Better late than never, but I spent a lot of time focused upon other things. You could be the best business person in the world and a genius in every respect, but if the economic system around you collapses, it was all for naught.
Yeah, I think about that.
So
you know,
it is an important principle.
Yeah, I think about that. You know, if Galileo was born 100 years earlier, you know, before the telescope was invented, would we have not, you know, or Newton been, you know, born 300 years earlier, before, you know, parchment was really even in use in the printing press? Would we know their names? And that conversely makes me think maybe there are things we're missing out on now because the technology hasn't been there. But I think, you know, the foundation of civilization, you have to have peace. And I'm hoping that the future looks peaceful. But, you know, I've seen, you know, interviews with you where you talk about, you know, that you vowed that you would never really make a mistake that you might have made in your past. And when you saw a trend like you see nowadays, that you would pounce on it. And you even said that, you know, before, I think you were even late to adopt Bitcoin. And so it's refreshing to talk to you and to get a glimpse of the future, perhaps, and your thought process, and to hear your very intellectually honest perspective on life and everything. I hope we could do a part 2. Maybe that will be in the cards.
That'd be fun. I'd be happy to.
That'd be great. Thank you, Michael, for
put it together, and I'll be there. I enjoyed our discussion. Thanks for having me.
Me too. Thank you, Michael.
Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic.